I'm just planning on doing some fiddling around inside of Obsidian, and we can chat while I'm doing that. Tansy, thanks if I pronounced your name correctly there. I'll get to your questions here first. So I think, so you're doing some work in Notion and you're finding Obsidian difficult, okay? You like the idea of Obsidian. It seems that for you anyway, having use of one hand, okay, that it may be harder to learn Markdown. You already have your literature notes in Notion. Well, I guess just to kick right off, I would say use what's working for you. Obsidian's a cool tool, and there's some pretty neat things you can do with it, but you can do a lot of cool stuff and helpful stuff inside of Notion as well. You can do backlinks inside of Notion. I did recently do a video on that. So if you're looking for some linking capabilities, there's definitely that capacity inside of Notion to do that, similar to Obsidian. But yeah, I mean, Obsidian's a fantastic tool, but so is Notion. It just depends. Like if you're having struggles with getting Obsidian to work for you, it's totally okay to do something else. You can replicate very similar workflows inside of other tools as well. It's just Obsidian might work well for other people, like it does myself, more than others, and that's totally okay. But yeah, today I'll continue to take questions in the chat box too, so be sure to put them in there. But today I'm just gonna hang out, gonna swap over to my screen here and just do some work inside of Obsidian. I think today I'm primarily gonna look at maybe developing some templates and getting that working, as well as I just signed up for Obsidian Publish. So I think I'm going to look at getting that going too. But I also have a number of articles and permanent notes that I want to start crafting today as well. Yeah, you're welcome, Tansy. All right, so over here, I'm just going to get diving in. So if you didn't guess by reading what I'm typing here, if you can see it, is I'm kind of a productivity nerd. I've been hanging around in the productivity space for the better part of a decade now, probably longer than that. And I mean, I have this little venture that I have here with effective remote work too, and my podcast process. I think productivity is super important. And then especially when you're getting into fields like remote work or working from home, it's even all the more important because productivity in a lot of regards is what I tend to think of as a self-leadership skill. It's not just about getting work done and having output. It's about directing yourself in the right directions and in the right areas, and then focusing your efforts there. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here too. And the center of a productivity system is, or the center of productivity in your life is having a system. of sorts. It can be tools, it can be habits and processes, but it's some kind of a system that helps you keep track of and manage all of the responsibilities that you have in your life. And as a result of having that system, it does require some tending. I like to think of productivity systems as needing to be simple, because the more complexity you add, the less likely you're going to be tending to those systems, because of the friction that's involved with complexity. But if you can make something complex but not complicated for yourself, that's a good thing too. So anyway, I'm just trying to get to the core idea here of, if I don't tend to my systems daily, then it will fall apart. And what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of going through, and there are sentences that are coming out that as I'm writing them, I'm like, oh, you know what, that's a really great like atomic or evergreen note. And so what I'm trying to do is make sure that I link those in the process too, and then I'll go back and I'll either flesh those out, or I will put a to-do tag on them so I can come back to them at a later point in time. So I've talked about this before in some other videos and in the Obsidian Made Simple course as well. But building, and I think taking notes like this in an evergreen process or a permanent note style process, I find is a very iterative process. In fact, productivity type mindsets and systems are very iterative in general. You kind of start off at one place, and then I like to term it that you refactor it over time. If you're not familiar with the term of refactoring, it comes from programming, and it's basically taking a piece of code and either updating it to make it, work with a different piece of code or dependency or different library that you're using, or you're taking that and simplifying it, making it easier to read, easier to use, and so on and so forth. I think that crafting these type of permanent notes and in your vault or whatever you're using is very akin to that. For example, like I was just writing this one here, and then at a certain point I was just like, I don't really have anything else to say on this right now. And I know it's not fully fleshed out, but it gives myself a good basis for trying to develop the thought and connect other thoughts to it. And so as a result, I feel like it's okay for me to just kind of leave it where it's at. And then if I encounter this note in the future, which I will likely do, then I can make adjustments to it at that point in time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create myself a little footnote section here. And then a lot of this concept comes from getting things done. Which I don't have notes in here because I haven't read that book in a very long time. But let's see. type permanent. Okay, so Gabriel says Markdown is a piece of cake. Yeah, it's fairly, I would agree. I think it's fairly straightforward to use Markdown once you get the hang of it. But yeah, you do have to use a lot of symbols and stuff, though. And so if it's challenging to type those symbols, then definitely more of a visual editor like you get in Notion or other applications is probably a good way to go. But yeah, if you kind of get the hang of the syntax of Markdown and it's not an issue to actually physically type it, Markdown is really, really versatile. And it's used in a lot of different places. Like even Slack now uses Markdown. You can turn on the ability to use Markdown to format your chat messages. I find it to be a lot more fluid. You don't have to remove your hands from the keyboard or do some crazy stuff highlighting text to be able to format it. So that's kind of a nice thing. But again, it's not for everybody, and that's totally all right. I'm just personally a little biased towards it. Okay, so I've essentially wrapped this node up here. One of the things I wanted to kind of do today was invest a little time in developing some templates. I know that I created a folder here already and kind of given myself just some basics. And so I haven't really messed with this feature too much in Obsidian yet. So we're going to do a little bit of that today. So permanent note template, I'm just going to do this. We'll just start here like that. And then I guess we'll just try it out, see how it works. I believe I have the template plugin already turned on here. Yes. Okay. And then I'll go to this one. We'll just see template. Oh, maybe I don't have that configured correctly. That would do it. Templates. Oh, that's really, really nice that it works like that. That's super helpful. And then especially too, I'm looking at considering moving some of my project development workflows out of Notion and into Obsidian, just to try to keep a lot of the stuff that I'm doing in the same tool. I'm really enjoying working in Obsidian for this type of stuff, but I'm not using Notion as much as I thought I would long term. It's a great solution, and I've got everything there kind of figured out for managing my year and managing my aims and goals and what that looks like and having it all tied together. But I'm looking at keeping that in Obsidian because then I can also pop open Dynalist in here too in an iframe, because I've been experimenting with that for a task management solution. I know last week when we did a live stream, I was looking at trying to implement that inside of Obsidian directly. And there's a ton of solutions to try to integrate things in through plain text. Brett Terpstra has a number of scripts that you can incorporate task paper formatted tasks right into a directory and interact with them that way. But it just, something didn't quite feel right about it with me, and feeling good about something is really important for me when I'm trying to develop a workflow around it. And so while ideally having tasks and stuff inside of Obsidian would be great, and maybe that'll be an option in the future once the plugin API gets released, so that you can kind of look for tasks a little bit more globally inside of your vault and then interact with them in a unified place. That would be kind of nice to have. But as of right now, I think I'm just going to experiment with Dynalist because it offers a lot of the functionality that I'm looking for in plain text. So that's kind of it in that regard. I'm going to get back here. Iframe templates. I do have a Dynalist note in here that's using that. I can just pop that over. And I realize I could be using the quick switcher here to get around a little bit more quickly. And then I will just remove that, because then you can pretty easily just pop in a URL that you want to iframe in there, and then it'll render. Okay. And then literature notes. These look a little different for me than others. If you saw the video this week that I did for book notes, that's kind of what my literature notes look like. And so I'm going to actually open up that note now, and then I'll just copy and paste that into there. And then I'll just kind of trim this down. That gives me a good template for starting a literature note inside of Obsidian. Now, I know one question that came up in the comments of that video that I haven't had a chance to actually respond to yet, but I'm going to talk through right now, is I use Drafts, which is an application for iOS and macOS to capture tasks, or text rather. And the question was like, why don't I do all of this formatting and wiki linking in Drafts and then just copy it in here? Or why don't I use OneWriter, which is an application on iOS that you can use to access your Obsidian vault and edit it there? Why don't I use those in those ways to get my literature notes over to Obsidian? Well, for one, I just tend to keep things simple. Drafts is a great application just for capturing text. It's really easy for me to just open up a note and start typing. My big deal is just I don't want to think about it. Usually when I'm taking notes, that's not the time that I want to be thinking about formatting or editing or things like that. And so as a result, I tend not to do those things in Drafts. So what I'll do is I will just have my notes. As you can see here, in Drafts, I basically just had this section with a little heading that signified that that was the book. I didn't have all this extra stuff. I didn't have the links or anything in there. And that's because Drafts is my capture space and Obsidian is my development space, or more my integration space is the way I tend to think of it. Capture being the place where I am getting stuff out of my head and into something so that it's not in my head anymore. And then integrations where I'm spending time processing on that. It's not that I am necessarily doing anything crazy with it, but in reality, what I'm doing is what I'm doing right now, which is I am taking notes, I am processing through, I'm developing permanent notes, I am trying to figure out what exactly I think about the subjects that I've taken notes on and where it might fit in my current thought processes that I have documented here in my vault. And so that's why I'm not really doing that inside of Drafts. Additionally, why don't I use OneWriter for this type of stuff? I kind of don't like just capturing straight into the vault. Drafts is nice because it gives me a focused place to do that. I'm not necessarily going to dive into too much stuff otherwise. If I, just stick into Drafts. Plus, it's really easy to just capture other thoughts and notes in there as well. So that's kind of why I don't get into OneWriter. Plus, I just generally don't do much editing of my Obsidian vault on mobile anyway. I tend to like digging into it in the full UI on the Mac and my other desktop that I have behind me over here. Gabby, you say that you're always dumping thoughts, links, and anything else into your Todoist inbox. I used to do that. I'm not a Todoist user. I've used it a little bit in the past, but I primarily used to use OmniFocus. And I used to dump everything into that inbox. And what I ended up finding was challenging for me, and the reason why I don't do it anymore is that I had a lot of stuff to process through and figure out where it went and what I needed to do with it going forward. And that just became a huge cognitive load for me to try to manage. And so I ended up just trying to capture things into drafts on my phone. The other reason for that is that I tend to have ideas or thoughts when I'm elsewhere, and trying to capture it into another tool just didn't really make sense for me. And I've been using drafts for ages. I mean, I can't even remember when drafts came out, but I think I've been using it since like version 2 or something like that, and they're on version 5 now, and they don't release major version updates annually or anything like that. It's been a good, I think, 6 or 7 years that I've been using drafts on my phone. So it's just kind of muscle memory too. Plus, it's just a neutral place to put stuff, so that's kind of why I'm not using that. But if that's working for you, awesome. Definitely a good thing to be doing that. Jeff, you've gone fully Obsidian. Your daily note is the daily inbox as well, for better or for worse. Yeah, I've considered doing that as well. Kind of where I have been sitting in my productivity system for the last few years. And I'll just pop over to camera only here so we can just chat, since I'm not really doing anything in Obsidian right now. We'll pop back over if we need to. But I have been using for the last couple of years the bullet journal for a lot of managing my tasks. I've found over time that that's not the best for managing bigger picture stuff or projects. It does really well for day-to-day stuff, I've found. And so I've primarily been using that. It's kind of, you can see it sitting over here on my desk, but the way I'm using that now is I'm using that as my place to time block my day out, as well as capture thoughts, ideas, or notes, or things I want to remember about the day. So you have one page that is for that time blocking, and the other page is for capturing. It's very similar to how folks like Cal Newport use the bullet journal. So I've really diverted away from using the official bullet journal method by doing that, but it's still kind of a lot of the same principles. And then from there, I mentioned earlier in the stream that I have been experimenting with Dynalist as my main database for tasks. I have tasks that live lots of other places as well, Notion, Discourse, and other softwares. But I need a place to kind of congregate a lot of the big stuff together so I can keep it all together. I'd be interested to hear, though, Jeff, how you're finding that the daily note is working for you in that, and if you're able to move that into other places, how that workflow is working for you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. All right, so I'm going to drop back into Obsidian here. Then head over to To-Do. Okay, so you're taking mainly notes and activities, just writing things down for the day inside of your daily notes, and then your tasks in Microsoft To-Do. Okay, that's a really helpful workflow, I think it sounds like. Yeah, definitely interested in hearing how that works out for you long term, if that's something you stick with. I do think the daily notes option inside of Obsidian is awesome. I just have a tendency to get really distracted or forget about it when I'm primarily working out of a digital tool. So that's why I'm using paper most of the day to keep me grounded through the day. But then if there's anything important that I'm finding that I need to have some more thoughts on, I'll probably put that in my daily notes. Is usually what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, so I have this tag here. All right. All right, so Ryan's asking that he always finds it tough deciding should a parent link to a child or a child to a parent or both. That's a really good question, and I don't really have a very good answer on that one. It probably just depends on the situation. If you find that there's relevance one way and not the other, like from the parent to the child or from the child to the parent, then one way probably makes sense. Otherwise, the thing that I've been finding is cool is just being able to see the graph view here, because you can see all the different connections that I have. Now, granted, it doesn't always get the backwards links one direction or the other. Well, actually, no, it does. Yeah, because this was the parent note here, and then this is the child note that I'm currently on. And so I guess it probably doesn't really matter with this improved graph view that's here. If you find that you need to navigate between notes, it's probably a good thing to link in both places. But as I mentioned, it's really easy to kind of see the connections between. So you can see here, this note is a permanent note that I crafted out of this literature note from an article that I read on the Toggle blog, and then crafted that permanent note out of there. And then there's all sorts of different topics and stuff that are connected. So it's probably okay to just do whatever you feel is working best there, because it seems like the system is starting to sort some of that stuff out for you, which is pretty cool. All right, so this is going to be that toggle article. Okay. Just because responsibilities feel urgent doesn't mean they are. It kind of stands on its own, doesn't it? Because it's very true. You can see, like, my note-taking style here is very much not academic. I'm not citing tons of sources or anything like that. I am trying to consolidate things that I have understanding of, or ideas, opinions that I have, into a note. You can see that here too, because this has been my experience with responsibilities feeling urgent, is that usually they feel urgent because someone else or myself is putting pressure on myself to make them feel urgent, but they're not necessarily truly urgent. Yet sometimes we can be skewed, or those perspectives can be skewed by other people or ourselves. I'll put that here too. Because there's almost this pressure to perform, or to not fail at something, or not feel like we've failed someone, even though it's not truly urgent. And so we have to kind of guard ourselves against that. Because when you guard yourself against false urgency, of course, I'm just totally screwing that up. When we guard ourselves against false urgency, that gives us the place to make decisions for ourselves instead of being controlled by other people. Now, obviously, there are situations in life, like the workplace, in some circumstances where if a boss says, hey, can you get this done by Friday? There's a level of urgency on that. But it doesn't necessarily make it a tip-top of the iceberg urgent task that you need to get done and drop everything now. It doesn't necessarily mean the company is going to fall apart if something doesn't happen with it. Hey there. Thanks for joining up, and thanks for everybody that's watching too. In case you didn't catch what we're doing today, I'm just kind of doing some writing in some permanent notes in my Obsidian vault, and then just kind of playing with a few things. This will be available as video on demand later. I'm not doing anything that I don't feel comfortable with putting out for people to see for eternity, but it should be just fine to catch this later if you don't get a chance to stick around the whole time. I am planning on wrapping up in about a half an hour or so, so keep that in mind as well. But yeah, feel free to throw any questions that you have in the chat, anything you want to say, any comments about what you're seeing. Definitely want to have a conversation with you all today about Obsidian and note-taking or anything productivity related in that regard. Okay, so Eisenhower Matrix. This is something I think I want to find an image for, just because I think an image does a good job of kind of communicating what it is. So make sure that made it there. Cool. Yeah, don't worry about if you got to jump off watching this stream because it's late where you are. I will have this available later. Okay, so Newton says, does your graph have all the notes or only has the linked ones to the note you're editing right now? So this is the local graph. And so what it is it just shows the graph of the notes that I'm on currently. If I open up the settings here, I can increase the depth of this local graph. And what I'll do is I'll pop it open here so it's a little bit bigger. So what I did by increasing the depth from 1 to 2 is that it goes out now 2 levels of links from the note that I'm currently on. This is different from the main graph view that you get over here. Oh, shoot. Sorry. I totally forgot that I had my video in that corner and that you couldn't see it. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, this is the local graph here. And then my main graph is this big conglomerate of things here. So I've got a number of things going on with that and lots of different stuff here. But I think this is really, the graph view here is really powerful, but I have actually found the local graph view to even be more powerful just because it gives me a local context of the note that I'm currently working on, and it helps me kind of see where it fits now inside of my vault versus otherwise. Get back to that other note that I was working on and make sure I create this one as a to-do. Come back to it at another point in time. Okay, so I wrote that one up. And yeah. So am I using Obsidian for scientific papers, etc.? No, I'm not. I don't read a lot of scientific papers. I tend to read books, more so books that I can buy, not necessarily super scientific things. But Obsidian can be used very well for scientific papers because it's just text files. You can take notes on anything. You can use LaTeX or Mermaid.js to do either math equations if you need that, or Mermaid does graphs and charts type of things, so you can render those in here as well. So, okay, how do I set up the local graph? That's actually fairly easy. All you have to do is to go up to the 3 dots up here in the corner of a note, and then hit Open Local Graph. What that will do is it'll open the graph, the local graph, into a separate pane. And then you can drag that wherever you want to. I like to have it over here in the sidebar at the bottom where you can't see it behind my face. But I'll pull it over into this one just for now. And then what happens with that is that whenever you navigate to a new note, it will change the graph based upon what note you're on. And so the local graph is pretty nice because it gives you the context of that local note and see where you have information or where those notes are linking to. So that's pretty straightforward and easy one to use. And in fact, I would recommend using the local graph over the main knowledge graph because it is so much more relevant to what you're working on in the moment. Rodrigo, hey there. I love Obsidian. For now, I can only write plain text on it. I'm using Roam to connect ideas because of the block reference feature. Do you think that Obsidian can be as powerful if I use it with huge amount of text? I'm afraid of losing content that's entirely online in Roam, and Obsidian's great because of local files. Okay. Well, I guess it just depends on how comfortable you are adjusting your workflow. I think, Roam works really well if you want to get super granular on like sentences and words and things like that. You can replicate some of that inside of Obsidian. For example, if I were to just tag this, with a special tag, let's say schedule, just for fun. And then if I go to that note, I get, and I'll open my backlinks pane. I get where that note is right here. And then if I click on it, it goes right back to that backlink at that point in time. You don't get a lot of the fancy filtering and things that you get inside of Roam because of the database that's there. However, you do get that ability to kind of get right in the file where you're looking for. So if you think about a page inside of Roam as similar to a document or a file inside of Obsidian, it kind of works, but there are some limitations to the block references there. I would definitely have to say that if you are looking at, using one or the other, just go with what works for you. Both are fantastic pieces of software that enable personal knowledge management, workflows to be a lot easier. And so you can't really go wrong one way or the other. Ryan says, challenge for you, tags versus a parent category page. Let's take pets, dogs, lab, poodle and pug, cat, Maine Coon, and tabby, and other. How would you lay that out? Well, that's a really interesting thing. I need to make sure that I understand that first and foremost. I'm going to open up my daily note. Okay, tags versus a parent category page. So what I would kind of do with this is maybe do it both ways. To be honest, if it's information that I need to access in different ways, or maybe I'm referencing it in different places, I would do a dogs page and then a cats page. And then if I do maybe, and I'm totally going to have to destroy all these notes in my vault now. Once I do this, we'll do lab, and I'll just do one. I'm not actually going to do the cats just because I don't want to have to clean up a million files afterward. But poodle, pug. Then what I would do is I would maybe, for ease of accessing those files, I would go into those and tag them dog or whatever. So then I have the structural note inside of Obsidian that is referencing dogs. And then I would also have this other tag over here to say, okay, these are all of my dog notes that I need to keep track of. Now, obviously, this might not might not necessarily be what you would always do, but if you do have if you need, let me put it this way: if you have notes that need to be browsable in a structured way, use the kind of map of content style and just create a structural note in here for that where you have links to all those pages. But if you need to have quick access to all of those notes and they might be located in different places throughout your vault, or you might have references, a link to dogs in different places throughout your vault, you could definitely use a tag to kind of group them all together. That's the kind of way that I think about it, is use a structural note for places that need to be, or pages that need to be linked in one place, and then use a tag for something that is a little bit more broad type based, if that's something that's important to your vault. I hope that clarified your question or gave you an idea of what you needed there. Rodrigo, yeah, the feeling of being your owner of your files is pretty awesome. I definitely enjoy having control over my files and where they're going versus not really knowing what's happening to them inside of a database somewhere else. You can say a bunch of stuff in a privacy policy, but there's a lot of wiggle room in legal language that a lot of companies aren't super clear on. And so I'm very grateful to have this level of control. And especially when dealing with thoughts and things that are much more personal to myself than I would necessarily be in like a task manager. There's obviously personal things that I put into a task manager, but when I'm thinking through problems, when I'm thinking through things, when I'm journaling things, the last thing I want is to have that information siphoned off somewhere else that might be exposed to someone or susceptible to security breaches and so on. I like having that sense of control over that type of information as well. I appreciate your channel and what you do. I really thank you for that. Thanks for watching the videos. I'm really grateful for everybody who watches and finds them helpful, and I'm glad that they're helpful. Do let me know in the future if there's anything that you would find helpful in the channel. You can leave them in the chat here or in the comments on this video or any other video as well. I definitely look at all of those if there's anything else that you want to see in the future. Brad asks, Brian first actually tipped the local graph. You can change the depth, which can be super helpful. Yeah, I love that feature. Because if you go under the gear here, filters, and then depth, if you amp that up, it's not going to show on this one, but I'll jump to a different note where it will. So yeah, this one here, it will, if you jump it up to 2 or 3, it'll show you multiple layers of links out. So I'll show you what happens here, and I'll pull this over to this. So a level of 1 of depth will only get you the notes that are directly linked to the note you're currently on. And then 2 will be all the notes that those notes are linked to. So it really gives you a sense of like what is close to the note that you're currently working on, and it might give you an idea of some ways to connect notes together that maybe you didn't necessarily think of before. Brad, do you use Zettelkasten file names at all? No, I don't actually. And that's because I find it to be, I don't know, really difficult to read. It's nice to have that identifier if you're running up to having notes with the same name and things like that. But what I am doing here is I'm taking the Andy Matusek, and again, every time I say his name, I think I'm butchering it. So I'm sorry about that if I am. But I take his more approach for naming permanent notes, where I'm more making a statement, a strong opinion, or a strong fact that I'm trying to elaborate upon in that note. And then my literature notes that I'm taking are much the same. It's the title of the book or the article, and some other metadata. If I run into a conflict, I'll likely cite the source in that regard. So yeah, I don't really use the Zettelkasten file names. They're really nice if you're using more of the straightforward Zettelkasten approach, where you're looking at notes fitting in between one another, like Nicholas Luhmann had. There's very much a hierarchy to that, or a structure to that. But with Obsidian and the knowledge graph view, I don't necessarily find it as necessary to do something like that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back into some to-do notes here. I'm going to reload my note-taking workspace, which is really handy, by the way. If you have a particular way that you like to lay out your notes for taking permanent notes, or if you've got projects that you're managing in here and you have specific notes that are helpful to start at, then you can set that up in your Vault, and then using the Workspaces plugin, you can just save a snapshot of that to be able to return to it in the future. So like I have set up here, I have the File Explorer over here, I have my main index note, I've got the tag pane selected, and then my local graph. So that's what I find ultimately helpful over here. This is my kind of my default for starting taking notes. So let's go back over to do. Problems are usually more than one layer deep. Go permanent note here. Let's see. I know that's a note I want to link to this one. Not what I wanted there. Oops. All right. Getting a number of things done today, which is kind of fun. I definitely appreciate everybody who's joining up here. If you have any questions about what I'm doing, feel free to ask in the chat as well. Okay, this one. Okay, so Gabby, you're trying to process all your article notes and book notes into permanent notes, and it's a bit tough. Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I find it a bit challenging myself too sometimes. What I have found has been really helpful for me is, I'll go back to this Einstein note for a point of reference, is that when I write down what I'm already thinking about a book or about something that I'm consuming versus just copying a quote or an idea, if I write down what I'm thinking about it in the moment, it makes it a lot easier for me to come back and craft other notes out of that. So, for example, in this note here, um, educational success comes from stimulating imagination and creativity, not rote learning. That was a sentence that I just basically reworded from the book in my own words in a way that made sense to me. But it just has that feeling of this is a really strong opinion or a strong fact that I find important to me. And so what I'm doing is I'm just going in and trying to flesh out those thoughts a little bit more. Okay, why do I think that way? What's coming to mind when I think about this subject? Is there anything else that is important to me about this? And then in that process, as I'm writing those notes, then I might come to different ideas that I also think need to be developed into permanent notes. I definitely don't have all of this sorted out. I'm not an expert at it by any means. I've just been starting to experiment with it more and more and more because I've been finding it helpful to do so. I would just recommend just start writing. Start writing what you think down. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Don't worry about making sure you're conveying the exact right ideas. This is all a process, and to me, the end goal of building permanent notes is to clarify my own thoughts first and foremost. When I write, I tend to think and I tend to refine what I'm already thinking. And when I walk through that process, it really helps me down the road because then I really feel like that is a skill that compounds. Because when you start to clarify and refine your process and your thoughts over and over again, it gets better and better and better. So then the process becomes easier over time. I would just recommend just start walking the journey with it. If it's not perfect or you're not happy with it right away, keep going. It's definitely something you can continue to develop. You'll probably see notes, and I'll probably do the same thing that you wrote, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and be like, man, what was I thinking at that time by writing that? Or, wow, I really didn't convey that very well. But then you'll realize that your writing has improved a lot since then as well. So don't get discouraged. Just keep trying. Keep going through it. And if something's not jiving for you too, it's okay. Just experiment. That's kind of my motto when it comes to stuff like this is just experiment. Be okay trying new stuff. And if it doesn't work, then try something else. So Brad, is the to-do tag in my system akin to a seedling referencing Andy? Yeah, it kind of is. The to-do tag is definitely something that it's a signifier to me that there's a note that I need to come back to in my vault that needs further development. It's either something that I have recognized in a note, such as here, where I haven't written this one yet, that I want to come back and refer to it or build it out further. Or like in this one, I probably won't end up finishing this one today. Just kind of feeling how I'm doing here. What I will probably leave this to-do tag there so that I can come back to it at a later point in time and finish it out. So yes, it's very similar in that regard. Does anybody know how to implement some kind of encryption for files, for example, to be decrypted in memory for use within Obsidian? There is a number of ways I think that you can go about doing that. The standard that used to be, and I'm unfortunately not super up on it now, that used to be using something like TrueCrypt, where you can encrypt a directory. You can use a sparse bundle on macOS to encrypt. It's basically, if you think of it like, if you're familiar with macOS, when you get a new piece of software that you've downloaded, usually it creates this fake drive on the computer. It's very similar in that regard. It's an encrypted file system of sorts that's kind of isolated together called a bundle. And you can use that. You can use something like TrueCrypt. And then when you're ready to work on your vault, you decrypt it and then you would open it up inside of Obsidian. But then when you're done with it, you would encrypt it or lock it back up, and then it wouldn't be accessible unless you added the key. I'm not super up on, like I said, about current softwares. I don't think TrueCrypt is being updated anymore, but there's something along that lines. If you can find a software that does a similar thing, that would probably be the way to go. Because then you can also upload those files to a service like Dropbox or Google Drive, OneDrive, and then and then be able to sync it to other devices that can decrypt it as well. What are the hotkeys and shortcuts that I often use? The main ones that I use actually are Command P, which is the command palette. This is a really easy, quick way to jump to basically anything inside of your vault. You can, templates. You can insert templates here. You can change workspaces. You can search for commands if you're not sure if there is a command that exists. You can switch light mode, dark mode. You can search the current file, open up your settings, and then it also gives you the keyboard shortcuts here too. So I find this actually to be a really helpful place to start if you're just getting used to using Obsidian. If you want to learn a keyboard shortcut, just learn Command or Control P. If you're Command, obviously, if you're on the Mac, Control if you're on Windows or on Linux, because then you can start to learn these other keyboard shortcuts that are set here too, and then get access to all the other cool stuff that's in here. The other one that I've been getting used to using is Command O or Control O, which is the quick switcher. This one just gives you a quick way to switch between notes that you have been accessing most recently. That's really the biggest. For me, I haven't really taken a lot of time to like super dig into all the keyboard shortcuts inside of Obsidian, just largely because I'm just doing writing in here. I'm not doing a lot of crazy other stuff either. But those two have been the most helpful for me to just kind of getting started. The other kind of shortcut, it's not really a keyboard shortcut in Obsidian, but the one that I've been using lately to kind of reset myself, which I was just talking about a few minutes ago on the stream, is the workspaces. So if I hit Command P and then load workspace, I can either open up my projects workspace, which I'm not because it's got some sensitive stuff in it at the moment, or standard notes, which is my normal note-taking workspace. And basically, I've got my main index note here, and then all this normal stuff that I have for taking notes or working on the note part of my Obsidian vault. That's kind of a lot of the main workflow stuff that I use. Yeah, you're welcome, Ethan. I'm glad you found that helpful. Well, I mean, if there's any other questions today, I know we're getting to about an hour. I would love to hang out and answer a couple more questions, but I do know that I need to wrap up soon. So I can hang out on the stream for just a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, do be sure to get them in the chat. I know it's been kind of fun to do these live streams lately. I just started doing them last week. And I bought some nice gear for it, as you can tell. I got a new camera and some lighting. And I'm hoping to do these on a regular basis. Yeah, you're welcome about that response about encryption. I think having that ability to encrypt your files is important if you want to. And it's great that Obsidian allows you to be able to do that. But yeah, with the live streams, I've been enjoying doing these on Friday afternoons. I'm not necessarily going to commit to myself to doing them every Friday, but it's been nice on the Fridays that I am available to be able to do that. Thanks. Appreciate the quality. Well, I appreciate that comment. You're very kind with your words there. Yeah, you're welcome, Gabby, about this stream too. I've been really enjoying doing this, and it also helps me to kind of refine my thought processes around one, like here's maybe some things that would be helpful to do on the YouTube channel, but two, it just helps me have a conversation with people, and I work so much better having a conversation with people about stuff. It helps me to refine what I know, helps me to refine what I don't know, and then can learn at a later point in time too. So how do I manage my daily notes like a diary? Okay, well, let's see. I don't do too much management of them inside of Obsidian. I can show you a little bit about what I do. And so for one, I don't use them too much right now because I have my bullet journal over here that I tend to write my daily notes and things down in, just because I like paper for doing that on a day-to-day basis. But I have been enjoying kind of writing some stuff down inside of Obsidian. And so what I have been doing has been, just I'm primarily noting down stuff that I am reading in here. So as I read an article about Dynalist for productivity. And then what I'll do is when I've done that, I will link that note here. And then I'll create that note. That gives me a jump off point of one, when I read something, and then two, where I can integrate something into my system. So I'll usually start my literature notes from the daily note on the day that I read that item. But from there, sometimes will just write down things inside of my daily note. I might link it to something else in my vault. I might not. It just really depends, to be honest, on what I'm working on. And that's kind of the thing that I've liked about Obsidian, is that it's really flexible. I don't have to shoehorn myself into one workflow like I would in a software like Evernote. That's so much more structured than this. If I, for a couple months, decide to do something one way, great. Then I can shift to doing something another way later on, and it's all still there. It's all still linked together. It just might be in a slightly different format from one another, but they can still talk to each other. And that is something that I really enjoy about it. It affords me a lot of flexibility as far as taking notes long term. I was a user of Bear for a long time too, the Mac and iOS note-taking application. And that was nice because it allowed me some flexibility as far as tagging, because it's primarily you link notes together with tags. You don't have to worry about folders or anything like that. But it is just one long running list of notes, and after a while it can get a little overwhelming if you have a lot in there. This is nice because you can start to add structure, and you can start to add flexibility in here too with the different ways you link and tag things. So hopefully that was helpful. And Ryan, thanks for the idea about cybersecurity. That might be an interesting topic to dig into at some point in time, especially considering remote work. It's important to think about those things. So I'll look at maybe branching into doing something like that too, because it's an area that I have some knowledge in as well. I think I'm going to wrap up the stream for today. So thanks for everybody for joining. I really appreciate you watching. If you want to follow along with what we're doing here on the channel, be sure to subscribe. And if you're watching this later on, be sure to leave a comment below. Let me know what you found helpful, what was not. And that's really it for today. I'll catch you in the